Every web application needs to have control over who or what has access to it. This is where authorization comes in. In this tutorial, we'll learn how to implement an API key-based authorization in Fastify. Let's dive in. At the moment, anyone at all can send a request to our API to create users or projects or any of the resources that we've made available. They can create them, they can retrieve them, they can update them and delete them. What I'd like to do is to enforce the need to pass in a header to identify the user. I'm going to use a consistent header for every user. That's not the most secure strategy, but it'll get us started. If you use custom headers, it's a good practice to start them with X-. That means they're not going to clash with any of the standard specification headers that may exist. And I'm going to look for X-API-key. And the key I'm going to pass is going to be super secret key. So at the moment, when I send this, it works, but even without the header, it works as well. And I want to fix that. To manage that, I'm going to create a new folder called middlewares. And inside of this, I'm going to create a file called auth.js. This is going to be an async function called auth, and it's going to receive the request and the reply. I want to extract the API key from the request.headers X-API key. And I want to create a variable that's going to contain my known key. So my known key, I'm going to store in an environment variable. So process.env.API key. So require.env and invoke the config method. And in my .env, I'll create an API key, which is going to be super secret key. By using environment variables, I can keep these secrets out of the code base and provide them on the production server in a number of ways during deployment. So if there isn't an API key, because when we extracted it from the header, it wasn't there, or the API key is not the same as the known key, in that instance, we want to return a reply with a code of 401, which is unauthorized. And we'll send an error message, which just says unauthorized. At the bottom of the file, I'll export that function. Now, it won't be surprising that even without my header here, if I send this at the moment, it hasn't had an effect yet. And that's because although I've written this function, I haven't hooked it in. I haven't registered it with Fastify. I'm going to show a couple of different places and different ways that we can wire this in. First, at the top level at app.js, Fastify has a number of lifecycle hooks, and I can add in to those lifecycles. So here's the lifecycle from their documentation. We get a request and it's rooted. We get an instance logger on request. It's parsed, it's validated. And then just before it goes to the handler, we can hook in. So I'm going to do the validation at this point, just before the request is sent to the handler. By that point, the request has been parsed, it's been validated, and we can start to work with it. So I'll do fastify.addHook. The hook I want to hook into is preHandler. And the function I want to be answering that hook is the auth function that we've just created. So let me import that. So const auth is going to equal require middlewares auth. Okay, so let's try to get all the users now unauthorized. Let's activate the header, which has the right key. We get what we wanted. Let's have an incorrect key, unauthorized. We've now restricted our API so that only people with the API key can access any of the routes. But often we want different authorization for different routes. Everyone can get the resources, but not everyone can post. And we can do that in a couple of ways. The first thing we can do is we can modify our auth function. So back in our middlewares, I can check whether or not the method was one of the safe methods. They're normally counted as get and head. So getting the information and getting the headers. So I'll check here if the array get and head includes the request method. So in other words, is the request method either get or head? And if it is, I'll just return. And by returning here, I'll just move the request on to the next level. So it'll move into the handler function. With the API key, it works. Without the API key, it works. But if I change it to post to create a user, I'm going to get an unauthorized. But with the API key, it's going to be fine. Except I already have a user with that email address. So my other validation is working. Brilliant. The final scenario I want to look at is when we want to protect a single route. So rather than every route, or even rather than every unsafe route, a post, a put, or a delete, I want to protect a single route. So firstly, I'll just remove this Fastify add hook from the app.js file. I'll go to my routes folder and go into my user route. And I'll think about which one do I want to protect. Maybe I want to protect the post. I don't want anyone to be able to create new users. And to do that, I just put configuration object between the route and the handler function. So we literally put it in the middle. And I'm going to pass in preHandler as the key and our auth function, which I'll import at the top as our value. So in this way, if I try to post to create a new user, I get my unauthorized. I'll add in the header and I'll change the email so that will work. We'll maybe call them the real manager. And now I'll post and that's been created. For any other route, so my get, find, any other route, it's going to work without my authorization function. So 3 ways that we can add this authorization. On the top level, we can add it as a pre-hook. And in our middleware, we can check whether or not it's a safe method or not. Or in an individual route, we can pass in a configuration object, which takes the hook we want to hook into and the function that we want to answer. Using a single API key for the whole API means that we're not identifying our user, so we're not doing any kind of authentication. We're doing an authorization because we're not letting people without our key be able to use particular routes, but we're not doing authentication. We're not checking that the person is who they say they are. There are a number of ways we can handle that, and we'll look at some more of those in future videos. For now, all of the code is in the repository linked below, as well as a link to sign up for my newsletter if you'd find that interesting. See you next time.